In the 70s, she was Maude's daughter. In the 80s, it was all about the movies, from The Fog and Swamp Thing to Escape from New York and Back to School. The 90s, she gave us the voice of Catwoman for the animated Batman series. In 2000, she ran off and joined HBO's Carnival, and today she's gone back to her roots, theater, touring the country in the new Broadway production of Pippin. Hello, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on InnerVIEWS, our conversation with actress, author, and best-selling pinup girl, Adrienne Barbeau. Do you ever look back over your career and see it more as a story than something you lived every step of the way?
I do have strong memories of starting out in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And all those first days. And then there's, you know, somebody will ask about a show or something that I've done, and I think, well, I remember the city. I might remember the man I was dating, but the actual,
but the career
work,
stuff.
the career. I sort of think that, I guess I think of myself as a mother first, and the career was there to support being a mom or just being a person. You know, it's what I do for a living.
Right. When did your children realize who their mother was? Is that an odd time?
I don't know if they still do, you know, I mean, and nor do they care very much. Although one of my boys is, he's playing soccer at Brown. This is his first, he's a freshman and he's playing soccer at Brown. And he did say that somebody found out that I had been the original Rizzo in Grease. And this friend of his was a big theater aficionado, and that really made a difference. And I thought, oh, you know, I've never made a big deal about what I'm doing. Occasionally now I will, if I've got something on, you know, I'll say, oh, you know, I'm going to be on this episode of such and such. But the last couple of things I've done have freaked them out so much that they, Mom, I don't want to see that, you know. So they did come to see Pippin.
Yeah.
And again, I think it made them nervous because I was, you know, hanging from a trapeze.
In Pippin, we see you not just, you perform the role, but then there's a lot of circus in this production. And you get up and not just are in it, you are performing these acts. People sit there in awe of it, and they're like, why are you doing this? Why are you putting yourself through that?
Well, I'm doing it because the role came along just at the right time. I was, and how often does someone at this stage in their career get to do, you know, they called me and they said, are you interested in going on the road with Pippin? And I'd never seen it. And I wasn't terribly interested in leaving home, you know, to go on the road. But Andrea Martin, who did it, had a clip on YouTube of the scene and the trapeze number. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, well, not only is the character, is her philosophy aligned with mine, you know, we need to be in the moment. This is what we have. It doesn't, you know, there's no sense worrying about what's come before. And there's no sense worrying about what's coming in the future. We can't control it. We can't change it. Stay in the moment as much as you can and love it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there was the song, but then when she started doing the work on the trapeze, I thought, oh yeah, I can do that. And I was pretty sure I could do it. And I want to.
Okay, I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning. Started out doing USO shows.
Yes. Well, I started out doing community theater and in San Jose, California, and it was a multi-million-dollar organization even at that time. And they had a musical comedy review that I was part of. They applied to the State Department, and the State Department said yes, and suddenly I had my first paying job. We got $7 a day. And I graduated high school, and about 2 weeks later left to Southeast Asia. We were right on the DMZ, entertaining troops who after one of the shows that we did. 3 of them were shot and killed by North Korean snipers. You know, we had driven right over the same bridge. They followed us, and it was a real eye-opener for a, you know, middle-class, suburban upbringing. My parents never brought a newspaper into the house, you know. Maybe they read it at home, but I had no idea what was going on in the world. And we were shooting each other. We were, I mean, you know, it was...
How does an experience like that change a girl of that age?
Well, I think it gave me an understanding of lives that I had no connection with at that time. I still remember driving down the streets of Seoul, Korea, and the Korean women were giving us, you know, they didn't want us there because their only source of income was the American GIs. And there were people brushing their teeth in the gutters and living, I mean, you know, I had not ever seen, I hadn't seen poverty like that. I hadn't seen, even though it was not a war, but I hadn't seen conflict like that.
Yeah.
I think it gave me an emotional empathy and an understanding of lives that, you know, didn't have the benefits that I had had. So I grew up a little bit.
I don't mean to trivialize it when I say this, but then does that help you as an actor, as a performer, to see something like that and be able to understand another segment of
Yes,
people?
I think so. I mean, it certainly gives you an understanding of, yes, my whole scope of understanding of human nature grew. I don't know if I realized it at the time, but I still can see very specific moments from that time. And I don't see a lot of moments from a lot of my other, you know, life, but it was just, you know, I mean, it was certainly different than a young man going off to war, but you grew in some of the same ways, I guess. I hadn't ever thought about it until you asked that question.
You eventually make your way to Broadway, Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah.
Great cast. You share a dressing room with Bette Midler?
I shared a dressing room with Bette. It was before the Divine Miss M. She was just running off to try out her material and buying her wardrobe, which I didn't quite understand because she was going down to the thrift stores, you know, and
creating that persona.
And making her list. And Bette was in the show when I joined it. And so for my 2 weeks of rehearsal, I got to, you know, I sat in the audience, and she brought me to tears every night. She was just a brilliant actress, so, and a great friend. And there was John Savage was in that show. John and I ended up doing Carnival many years later, and it was a wonderful show to do. I did it for almost 2.5 years.
But then the next big hallmark for you, which becomes a mega hit. I can't imagine you knew that going into Grease.
Grease opened and we thought we were out of a job because the original reviews were terrible. I mean, the New York Times didn't get it, you know. I think there was one reviewer who got it. And I remember one of the actors saying, oh, he was in tears. He said, I can't have another failure. I can't have another failure, you know. We didn't know. Who knew? I mean, Grease was, you know, it was something I got because I grew up with the Drifters and the Platters and Johnny and Joe. And so when they said, you know, there's this audition, you know, you can get to sing 60s rock and roll, oh, well, I was comfortable. So no, I had no idea, no idea.
And you do get the best character, I think, in the show. Rizzo is by far the most interesting, has depth, great song, the whole thing, everything you can want.
I've never seen another production. I did see the national tour right after I left, but I've never seen the movie, and I've never seen any of the productions that followed. But I understand that our production bears very little resemblance to what came later.
But why have you never seen the others, especially the film?
Truth is, I was in a boutique one day and I heard this song coming over the muzak, and I realized it was the film version of There Are Worse Things I Could Do. And I thought, oh gosh, if that's what they did, I don't think I want to see it. I don't want to be, because my memory of it was much different.
Right.
And I think the production we did was much grittier, much more realistic maybe, much stronger, maybe a little more dark. I don't know. It certainly wasn't,
Yeah.
bubblegum. And so I just thought, I don't think I want to see it.
And if it hadn't been for that, there wouldn't have been Maude.
That's right.
They
That's
saw
right.
you in Grease and said,
Yeah.
Carol.
Yeah. Well, I had been nominated for the Tony for Grease, and so Norman Lear's casting director came to see the show. I don't know if Norman had seen it, but they called and said, Norman would like to meet you. They had already done the pilot for Maude, or I guess it was the pilot where she appeared on Archie
All in the Family.
All in the Family, having established her as having a daughter, Carol, who had a 7-year-old son. And Marcia Rod did the role. And she was wonderful, but I think when they got the go-ahead to do it in LA, she was in New York and she didn't want to leave, and for whatever reasons, they were having to recast the role. So I met with Norman, but the word came back that he thought I looked too young to have a 7-year-old son at that time. And so I thought, well, that's it, I just went back to Greece. And about a month later, they came back and said they want to see you back in LA for an audition on Monday. They couldn't find what they were looking for. So,
Wow. As a Broadway, a New York actress working in New York, hard choice to go for the sitcom, to go to LA and do that, or a logical next step in your career?
a logical next step. It was just at that point where I was thinking, well, I guess the next thing I should be doing is television. Didn't know anything about television, had no background in film at all, didn't grow up watching TV, didn't grow up going to the movies. I only knew stage and musicals, really. I mean, I had done some straight plays, but I really only knew theater. But they made the offer, and yeah.
I think that's something that makes Maude stand out so well, is the fact that they are stage actors. They are performers that know their craft and know how to connect with an audience.
That's what Norman always did when he was casting. And it helped because we shot the show like a stage play. We rehearsed for 3.5 days, 4 days, and then we did it straight through, just with a live audience. Didn't stop. No, if we really were in trouble, then we'd stop and pick it up. But, and then in between the first show and the second show, they would do their rewriting. This joke didn't work. Maybe so.
Two versions of the same episode.
Two
one right
versions
after
of the
each
same
other.
episode. And it was up to us to learn the new material, learn the new blocking while we were eating dinner, and just go out and do it again as though it were a stage play.
Question I asked earlier, I'll ask again. When you're in something like Maude, do you realize the significance, and how quickly do you realize what your show is doing?
I must have realized, because the episodes that I loved the most were the ones that were socially significant. I didn't, I wasn't terribly interested in doing pratfalls and, getting stuck in a garbage can or something like that. And so I love that. I don't know that I realized how important it was because I didn't know the industry. I didn't know television.
Did you know Norman Lear? Did you know what he was doing?
No. I remember going out for dinner with some friends when I was doing Fiddler, and them saying, there's this other show on TV, this All in the Family show, and it's getting to be very successful. But I was working at night. I'd been working at night since I was 15,
Right.
so I never watched TV. And I never watched TV when I was growing up, so I really didn't know the industry at all.
What fascinates me about Maude is that when the first season came out on DVD, now of course it's all available.
Yes.
When the first season came out, you took those episodes and they could have played today.
If they were on now, they'd be on cable and the dialogue would be different, you know, I mean, it was a tribute to Norman's power, really. And not only that, it was a tribute to Norman and all the writers and director and, you know, the producers, to their ability to present their message in a way that was palatable to a wide fan base, a wide audience, because they made it funny. Yeah. They weren't knocking you over the head. They weren't doing documentaries. They were slipping in their philosophy in a balanced way so that, you know, people just, they loved Archie Bunker. They loved Maude for the most part. And if they didn't love Maude, then I was there to present the other side, maybe, or, you know. He was able to do it with humor.
I heard somewhere, and I don't know, that Carol wasn't one of your favorite characters to play.
No, she isn't.
And why not?
Because she was, well, and in part it was my fault. I got there and I didn't understand the medium. And I sort of, you know, I got self-conscious and a little timid, and so they didn't quite know how to write for me, and so Carol became the straight character as far as I was concerned in the show. You know, she was there to give the information, to maybe to balance Bee's kind of humor with mine or whatever. I mean, I love doing the show. I love being with that family for 6 years, and they really were my family. And but when I look at the things that I've done since, they were all more interesting to me. She was a little straight, you know.
A thing that fascinates me when looking back at this period is that you become synonymous with feminism. There becomes and B. Arthur. There's this very strong thing.
Yes.
Yet what you're able to do in your career, very few could.
Maybe it's disingenuous, but when I look back on my career, I mean, I never did play a sex symbol. My first love scene was with Swamp Thing, you know. I mean, I never, but, so in my mind, I wasn't really getting offered those kinds of roles. You know, it just happened to be that I looked the way I did, and I had never thought about, or I had never clarified for myself my philosophical ideas about being in the world. I was a young woman trying to start a career in New York, so all I was thinking about was, what do I need to do to be the best I can as an actor or a musical comedy performer or whatever. The media came to me as a spokesperson for the women's movement. I had, you know, I'd sort of taken it for granted that I was doing what I was doing, you know, and I guess if I look back at it, my mom, you know, she worked all her life. She raised 2 children by herself. She was an independent woman. But I came from a line of Armenian women who were strong and who did what had to be done, you know. So Maude forced me to identify what was important to me. And women's rights were important to me. And the issues that we were dealing with on Maude were important to me, and I was aligned with them. It made me realize I was aligned with them, and suddenly I became a spokesperson for all of these other issues. And
when you do talk about, you know, your first love scene basically is with Swamp Thing. Before that, even if there's not a love scene, The Fog, there is a sexy voice there, and the fog is coming in. But you get into the whole, as they call it, the Scream Queen period, doing these films. You approach them more as just as acting in these action adventure films more so than seeing them as horror films, correct?
Yes, yeah. It was a time in the industry. Maude ended in '78. And in 1978, if you were doing television, you couldn't get seen for films. No, you know, because the prevailing thought was nobody's going to pay to see you at the box office if they can see you every week for free. And I did a TV movie with a young, upcoming horror director, John Carpenter. And we became close. We ended up getting married. And John said, I'm writing, I've got another project that I'm writing, and I'd love you to do a role in it. And I said, fine, you know. And that was The Fog. And of course, this was in the days of China Syndrome and what were some of the other really, you know, socially significant films. And he handed me this ghost story, and I thought, oh, shoot, you know, why couldn't it have been about, you know, pro-choice, or why couldn't it have been about something where we could change the world? But this was my first movie, and she's a wonderful character. And again, I mean, I loved her. I mean, because she stood, and she was the heroine, you know, she wasn't a victim.
Right.
I don't play victims very well. And so that was my first film. And that led right to, I guess, well, I don't remember what the order was. There were some others, but then it led to Creepshow, and it led to, and because I was identified with John emotionally, socially, and because my first couple of films were horror films, then I've got another label, you know. I started out, oh, she's a musical comedy girl, then she's a comedian. TV wouldn't even see me for drama until I finally cracked that nut. Then she's a TV actress, and then, oh, she's a film actress, but she's a horror queen, you know. And I don't care. As long as the roles come along that I like, doesn't matter what they are. Now I'm at a point where I get a lot of horror films offered to me, and they're terrible.
Oh, yeah.
They're terrible. And so now I don't, you know, now I don't take them. I just take the roles that I love, that I want to do.
When did you start deciding to write your own novels then? When did you start writing these vampire books, and how did that come into it?
This woman told me about a writing class that she had just attended that was taught by a woman who was a musical comedy actor on Broadway about the same time I was, and who was now teaching writing primarily to actors and actresses, several of whom I knew, you know. As it turned out, the writing teacher lived about a half a mile from my house. I could have walked to her house to take the class. I called her up, I went in, and I audited the class, and I started taking the class. Well, if you're going to take a writing class, you've got to write. You know, you've got to bring homework assignments in. So I started out writing about things that I thought people might find funny. I had just done a horror film in Russia. I took it because I wanted to go to Russia, not because of the script. I landed in Moscow on a day of an attempted coup where they declared martial law. I showed up on the set. I was supposed to be working with 50 trained rats. It turned out there were 16 rats, and all they'd been trained to do was eat fish, anything that smelled like fish. So whenever they had to have them on me, they just rubbed me down with fish juice. You know, they'd bring over a fish head and go like this. And so I thought, well, maybe this might be a funny story for other people. So I wrote the rat movie. Bram Stoker. It was based on a novel by Bram Stoker. So I wrote the rat movie. I wrote about being married to John Carpenter. I wrote about dating Burt Reynolds. And, you know, after about 6 months of bringing in these little pieces, the teacher said, you need to get an agent because you've got a memoir here. Okay, and so I got an agent. The memoir sold and did quite well. And then I was approached by an Irish author who had many books published in the UK. Hadn't had, I don't know if he'd had anything published here, but he said to me, you should write a horror, you know, a horror novel for your fan base. I said, well, I don't know if I can write a plot. I mean, I knew how the memoir turned out, you know. I'm sure I can write the characters and the scenes and the dialogue. And so we wrote together. We came up with an idea, and he sort of wrote the basic structure and the outline and turned it over to me, and I put it in my own words and, you know, change some of the characters. And we got a 2-book deal from St. Martin's Press, and the first one was Vampires of Hollywood. And then when time came to write the second one, my co-author was very busy with his own projects, and so I took over and wrote the second one. And that one is in the process of hopefully being brought to the big screen. I just co-wrote the screenplay with the producer. And then just wrote the third one, and so that's how it happened. If you had told me in 2000, because I think the memoir came out in 2005 or 6, if you had told me then that I would ever be writing anything for someone else to read, I would have, you know, what are you smoking? It's not. It just. I still don't believe it.
Well, we're thrilled with all the things you've written.
Thank you.
All the shows you've brought us, the television, the movies, everything. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you.
to what's in the future for you.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll see. A lot of soccer games.
Yeah. Adrienne Barbeau.
Thank you.
If you would like to learn more about our guests or watch other episodes of Interviews, visit our website at houstonpublicmedia.org/interviews. On the next Interviews, actress Adrienne Barbeau.
When I look back on my career, I mean, I never did play a sex symbol. My first love scene was with Swamp Thing, you know? I mean, I never, but, so in my mind, I wasn't really getting offered those kinds of roles.